Biomimicry. How can we start to do the things that nature's done? So if we look at these scales, we can see how they're designed to shoosh water right by them, to make it as slippery as possible so that fish can go where it wants to with the minimum amount of effort, but the greatest effect. And so we can build that into all of our projects. And so humble, powerful, and critical, that's water. That's what it is, and it's so encompassing. It's become the center focus in my projects, in my teaching. We're going to start to talk about some of the happy things, some of the cool things that are happening with water in the environment. So it's not a complete bummer. And this one is the combined work of Caltech, Bill Gates, and Kohler Company. And the challenge was that they needed to create restroom facilities for poor countries or for places where there's severe climatic changes or drastic things that happen in the environment, like Katrina. We could have used these at Katrina. So portable restrooms that need no power and are very effective, and they're interesting to look at. You know, they're not negative. They're built in shipping containers is how big these are. They're shipping container size, and they're decorated for the culture that they're going to. These happen to be in India, where their prototype was, and they're made with they're really nice inside, they're tiled, and their byproduct, they have solar power harvesting on the roof. The byproduct of this is potable water. And I don't know, I can't remember who the guy was, Jimmy Fallon. A very nervous Jimmy Fallon was presented a glass by Bill Gates to drink. I don't know if any of you remember that. But he actually did some of it, and it was astounding that he didn't, react violently, because it was good water. And it was the product of this waste facility. And Bill Gates was rather proud of that. So he's funded this. They're very proud of it up at Kohler. And when I did this presentation for the AIA, it was at Kohler. And the Kohler engineers were excited about the next phase, which is going to reduce the cost of these. But they're still more expensive than most villages can afford, or most places that need that. So I look at reservations where I do a lot of my work. And that's still on the outside, but it's getting better. Michael Pritchard, does anybody here do TED Talks? You've got to do the Michael Pritchard one. So there's another third thing you've got to Google, along with Winterbottom and Dreisaitl. You need to check the TED Talk by Michael Pritchard. He's an Englishman who's created this water bottle system that has incredible filters in it. And again, the smallest virus is typically 25 nanometers. His filters go down to 15 nanometers, which is pretty incredible. They will filter out almost any pollutants. And in the TED Talk, he combines this unholy mix of things together and drinks the water. And supposedly it's just fine afterwards. I think he is. And it's a very effective system. But I had actually heard of it before I saw the TED Talk. One of my past students, Wally, thank you, Wally Green. He had done a project in India where they used the jerry can version of this. And the jerry cans will last a family of four for, I think it's 3 to 4 years. And it's a nickel a day to have pure water out of those. So you can make water more potable. But the danger of that is sterile is not the same as pure water. So they're getting out all of the pathogens, they're getting out all the organic things. I mean, they mixed rabbit manure in this. I think the Jimmy Fallon water had all kinds of that in it. The water you can drink, and his filters as well, is palatable. But unfortunately, some of the other elements in there are still not good for human life. If any of you go to New Orleans for the ASLA conference after it's here next year, thanks again for hosting that. So year after this, it's going to be down in New Orleans. Be careful when you drink the tap water, because there are 9 known carcinogens in the tap water in New Orleans. And it's not just because they draw it from the river, but it's partly because they draw it from the river. There are things that they can't get out of that water. When you go to DC next, and I love going to Washington, DC, the tap water in Washington, DC has 17 things in it that are known to be harmful to humans. Now, why does that exist in our nation's capital? Well, there are 3 main reasons, and we can go to the next slide if you like. The 3 main reasons are that, one, some of the tests are very new. So they don't test for it because they don't know the tests are available that they need to. Second, some of those tests are very expensive. So a typical water authority can't afford to test for those elements. And the third reason is the one that makes me kind of nuts. And that is, if we don't test for it, we don't know that it's there. So 17 things next time you're in DC, be careful with the tap water. But the bottled water is not much better. In fact, it's tap water somewhere else typically. So anyhow, we're all in the soup, but it's the reality of potable water. So that introduces this notion of Jugaad. And Jugaad is a Hindi Urdu word. And I'm probably mispronouncing it terribly, but Jugaad is the notion of people doing more with less. So when we talk about the Lima, Peru example, that's Daniel Winterbottom just this last year, took some students to Lima, Peru. They have 1 centimeter of precipitation a year in Lima, Peru. There are 9 million people in Lima, Peru, 30% of them in slums, some of those marginal communities we were talking about. They're projecting a population of 16 million by 2050. They get their water from Andean glaciers that will be dry within 10 years, again at current rate of discharge. So the glaciers will be dry in 10 years with over 16 million people depending on them. But the interesting thing about Lima, Peru is it's a fog desert. The fog comes in every morning and it's battleship thick. It is pea soup thick. So you can't see through the fog. And so Winterbottom's group of landscape architecture students went over and created these various art forms out of screens so that they could start to harvest the fog and get the water purified. At the same time they were doing that, a Hindi fellow came up with the idea of billboards. Every city has billboards. So he said, why can't I create a material on the surface of this billboard? And this guy's not an engineer, he's not a landscape architect, but we should recruit him. But he was thinking creatively, he said, what can we do with these billboards? So he started to have screen printing done of the billboard material on a semi-permeable material surface. It harvests the fog, and then in the stem of the billboard, it has a series of very simply maintained filters that now produce 90 liters of potable water every day per billboard. That's Jugaad. And that's the way that's the way we do think. We are systems thinkers. So everybody in here is resonating with that thought. Why can't we do that? Of course, billboards. It's like a couple years ago when I was president of the state chapter in Wisconsin, we had a 3-day conference, and some of you were kind enough to come, I think. It was great. And we had a speaker one afternoon who was called a futurist. Anybody ever heard of a futurist? They make their money projecting what's going to happen for Fortune 500 companies. I don't know how they do it. But this guy, this was 1999, right? And this guy said, imagine photovoltaic panels that are clear that you can have on the windows of your building. Well, landscape architect, I'm immediately thinking, why doesn't every high-rise in every city get completely clad with PVs? We're off the grid, no worries, right? I think this is great. And somebody said, well, what does it take to make that happen? He said, it's already happening. And here's the thing he said I'll never forget. He said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly applied. This has already been done by the military in 1999. So I just read 2 months ago that the company that does that's now going public and it's going to be released to cities immediately. So now you can have clear PV panels on all of your windows and not even know it's generating electricity. So imagine your entire building as an energy creating source. When I was in New York City doing that conference with Winterbottom, about 3 weeks before that, I picked up a mechanical engineering book. Okay, it was a magazine. It was the magazine, Mechanical Engineering, Popular Mechanics, I think it was. And in that, it talked about these waterborne energy generators that they were putting in the bottom of the East River in New York City. And just it turns out that's right by New York City College. So I know I'm going to be there. This is so cool. And they were basically a small version of a wind generator, but it was going to be buried in the bottom of this tidal river, the East River. My first thought was, man, all the bodies in that river are going to plug that thing up in no time. What are they going to do about that? It's the East River, you know, gangsters have been there for years. But no, it wasn't that. So they put these things in the bottom of it, and they actually put it in a week before I got there. And so when I ran over there, I was kind of amazed to see they were pulling them all out. And I said, what's up? And they said that the force of the tide was greater than they'd anticipated, and it snapped the rotors. So they were going back to recharge those rotors and make them stronger. They have one array of those generators in the bottom of the East River, and it's powerful enough and it's installed now, to pull 1/3 of Manhattan off the electric grid. That's one array, one river. Oh my gosh, the future is here. It's stuff that we do with. We work with this. We're landscape architects. I can see your minds turning now. This is so cool. And some of the best micro wind generation companies in America, if not in the world, are in Chicago. They're here. We need to use that resource. So that 138-acre project that was mentioned at the beginning, that was one of those cool projects because when I met with the developer, I'd been referred by an architect. And so we sat down in his conference room, and she looked at me, kind of evaluated me, and she said, "So how big can you think?" That's the client we all want, right? How big can you? That's the first, I didn't know from Bumpkus. I said, okay. She said, this is 138 acres, what can we do? I said, okay, we can harvest every drop of water. We can pull this completely out of the water system for the city. She said, you can do that? I said, yes, I can. She said, what else you got? I said, okay, we can harvest energy with micro wind generation and PV panels, and we can pull it completely off the electric grid. No magic. She said, you can do that? I said, yes, we can. And she said, okay, what else you got? And I said, okay, we can do constructed wetlands in Wisconsin that can manage all the waste on site with no smell and no negative effect to the environment or to the participants of the site with no connection to the city sewer. She said, you can do that? I said, yes, we can. I got hired. So we can do that stuff. It's here. It's already proven. In fact, when I heard about these constructed wetlands was an ASLA conference in Minnesota. And an engineering company that does those actually has communities in northern Minnesota that function all year long with constructed wetlands to manage the waste at the center of their little population. So there's no negative effect, no smells. It's all taken care of naturally. How cool is that? And one of my students in the past, Kirk Penny, you may remember Kirk, New Zealander, he'll often say that the only really good fruit that he's ever had is from Israel. He said American fruit's like cardboard. Well, I don't know Israeli fruit, so I took umbrage at that. I was like, hey, it's made in America, it's okay. He said, no, really, it's more powerful, it's got better flavors. And I found out that most fruit in Israel is produced in an incredibly arid environment, but they're doing it at the site of their constructed wetlands. There's no negative that comes from that waste water, but it's being reused by those fruit trees to produce fruit. So it's that synthetic thinking. They're probably all landscape architects.